I want you to picture something. You're sitting at a table surrounded by every person who is supposed to love you unconditionally. The candles are lit. The food smells incredible. Christmas music is playing softly in the background. And then, in front of every single one of them, your own mother reaches into her pocket and hands you a crumpled scratch ticket, the kind you buy at a gas station when you forget to grab a real gift, while your sister is opening an envelope containing a 10-day vacation package to Italy. And everyone laughs. Not nervous laughter. Not uncomfortable laughter. Real laughter. The kind that means they all think it's funny. That was my Christmas. That was the night my family told me without saying a single word, exactly what they thought I was worth. $2. A joke. An afterthought. My name is Tessa Quillen. I'm 34 years old. I'm a freelance graphic designer living in a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of Mill Haven, and 2 months ago on Christmas night, my life changed in a way I still haven't fully processed. Not because of the money, though yes, $75 million will rearrange your entire worldview. It changed because of what the money revealed. About my family. About the people I had spent 3 decades trying to earn love from. And about a secret that had been buried so carefully I might never have found it, if my grandmother hadn't whispered 4 words in my ear before my mother pulled her away from the dinner table. Before I tell you everything, if this story is already hitting close to home, if you've ever sat at a table and felt like the odd one out in your own family, I want you to consider subscribing. Not for me, but because the stories we share here are for people who understand what it means to be underestimated. And this one is just getting started. Now let me take you back to Christmas Eve in Mill Haven. Back to the night everything cracked open. The Quillen family Christmas was never warm. I want to be honest about that from the start. It was organized, impressive even. My mother had a talent for making things look perfect from the outside. The wreath on the door was fresh pine. The table was set with the good china. There were exactly 3 candles in the centerpiece because my mother had read somewhere that odd numbers were more aesthetically pleasing. Everything was curated, everything was intentional, and none of it had anything to do with actual warmth or love. It was a performance. It had always been a performance. I arrived at my parents' house on Birchwood Lane at 4:30, carrying a tin of homemade shortbread cookies I'd spent 2 evenings baking and a bottle of red wine I definitely couldn't afford but bought anyway because I wanted to contribute something real. My mother opened the door before I could ring the bell. She looked at the tin in my hands, then at me, and smiled the way people smile when they're trying not to show disappointment. "Oh Tessa, you baked again." She said it like baking was a personality flaw. Like showing up with something homemade instead of something bought from an expensive store was a sign of failure. I stepped inside and told myself it didn't sting. I had been telling myself that for 34 years. I was getting less convincing every time. My sister Diane was already there, of course. Diane was always there first, always positioned perfectly in the living room with her highlighted hair and her tailored blazer, laughing at something our father had said. She looked up when I walked in and gave me a smile that was mostly teeth. "You look tired. Is everything okay with work?" This was Diane's signature move. The concern that was actually a dig. She wasn't asking because she cared. She was reminding everyone in the room that my work was unstable, that my life was precarious, that I was the sister who was always one slow month away from asking for help. I told her work was fine and went to set my cookies in the kitchen. Tanner was holding court in the living room by the time I came back. Tanner Quillen, my brother-in-law, Diane's husband of 6 years. He was the kind of man who filled every room he walked into, not because of genuine charisma but because of sheer volume and confidence. He sold commercial real estate across 3 counties and liked to remind everyone of that fact at least twice per gathering. He was mid-story when I walked back in, something about a deal he'd closed in November, and my father was listening with the kind of focused admiration he had never once directed at anything I'd ever done. I sat down on the edge of the couch and tried to look interested. My grandmother, Nana Ruth, was in the armchair by the window. She was 81 years old and had shrunk in the way that elderly people sometimes do, like the world was slowly compressing her. But her eyes were sharp. They had always been sharp. She caught mine from across the room and gave me a small, steady nod. The kind that meant she saw me. In a room full of people who looked through me, Nana Ruth always looked at me directly. It was the greatest gift she ever gave me, and she gave it freely every single time. Dinner was the usual theater. My mother had cooked a standing rib roast that Tanner complimented 4 separate times. My father talked about the property market with Tanner while Diane chimed in with statistics she'd clearly memorized from whatever Tanner had told her that morning. I helped carry dishes, refilled water glasses, and listened to my contributions to the conversation get talked over twice. By the time dessert was being cleared, I had spoken a grand total of maybe 11 sentences at the table. No one seemed to notice. Then came the gifts. My mother stood up from her chair with the kind of deliberate energy that meant she had planned this moment. She had that smile on, the wide one, the one she wore when she wanted an audience. She reached under the side table where she'd stacked a few envelopes and a small wrapped box. She handed the box to Diane first, and when Diane opened it, her eyes went wide. Inside was a printed itinerary. 10 days in Italy. Florence, the Amalfi Coast, Rome. Flights, hotels, a cooking class, a private wine tour. My mother had also included a card with a handwritten note that I couldn't read from where I was sitting but that made Diane burst into happy tears. My father started clapping. Tanner whistled. The room filled with the sound of a family celebrating one of its members. Then my mother turned to me. The room didn't go quiet dramatically the way it does in movies. It just sort of settled. Like everyone was exhaling at the same time. My mother reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out something small and flat. She held it out to me between two fingers and I had to lean forward to take it. A scratch ticket. One of the red and gold Christmas ones they sell at the gas station on Route 9 for $2. She was already smiling when I looked up. We thought it suited you, she said. You always say you like surprises. Tanner laughed first. Then Diane covered her mouth, but I could see her shoulders shaking. My father looked down at his plate. I held the ticket in my hand and didn't say anything for a moment. I felt the heat rise in my face and I pushed it down hard because I was not going to cry at this table. I was not going to give them that. I smiled and said thank you, and I meant it to sound gracious, but I think it came out too flat, too quiet, because my mother gave me a look that said she found my composure mildly irritating. It was Nana Ruth who broke the silence. She had pushed herself forward in her armchair and was looking at my mother with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Something between grief and fury. She started to say something, but my mother was already on her feet, already moving toward her with that practiced efficiency. You need your medication, Mom. Let me help you. Nana Ruth looked at me over my mother's shoulder as she was being guided toward the hallway. Her lips barely moved. But I heard her clearly. The words were four and they made no sense to me in that moment. Find Robert Crane's office. Then she was gone and the room moved on. And I sat holding a $2 scratch ticket while my sister cried happy tears over Italy. I didn't scratch the ticket that night. I drove home to my apartment, made tea I didn't drink, and sat at my kitchen table staring at it. A joke. That's all it was supposed to be. That's all I was supposed to be. I scratched it on December 26th, the morning after Christmas, still in my pajamas, using a penny I found in my junk drawer. And I want to tell you that I handled what happened next with grace and dignity and composure. But that would be a lie. What I actually did was scratch the last symbol, read the number printed underneath, check it against the prize key 3 times, go to the official lottery website on my phone, verify the number again, and then sit completely still on my kitchen floor for 45 minutes unable to make a single sound. $75 million. The Christmas scratch ticket my family gave me as a punchline had just changed everything. But first I needed to understand what Nana Ruth had been trying to tell me. Because something told me the money was only the beginning. Robert Crane's office was not what I expected. I had Googled the name the morning after I verified the lottery winnings, still sitting on my kitchen floor with my back against the refrigerator and my phone in both hands like it might try to escape. The search results were straightforward. Robert Crane, estate and family law attorney, Millhaven and surrounding counties, practicing for 31 years. His office was on Caldwell Street, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a small accounting firm, in one of those old brick buildings that Millhaven had too many of, the kind that looked like they had absorbed decades of other people's quiet crises into their walls. I called the next morning and his receptionist, a woman named Carol who sounded like she had heard everything twice already, gave me an appointment for Thursday without asking what it was about. Like she had been expecting my call. I told no one. Not about the winnings, not about Robert Crane, not about any of it. I went to work on Monday and Tuesday the way I always did, answering client emails, finishing a logo revision for a bakery in the next town over, eating lunch alone at my desk. I moved through those 2 days like a person wearing a costume of their normal life, smiling at the right moments, saying the right things, while underneath everything I was completely untethered from the ground. $75 million. The number didn't feel real. It felt like something I had read in a headline about someone else. On Wednesday evening, my phone buzzed with a message from Diane. Hey, just checking in. Mom mentioned you seemed quiet at Christmas. You okay? I stared at the message for a long time. The audacity of it was almost elegant. Quiet at Christmas. As though the problem with Christmas was that I had been insufficiently cheerful. As though the scratch ticket was a charming little quirk of the holiday and not a calculated humiliation delivered in front of the people who were supposed to be my family. I typed back, I'm fine, thanks for asking. Hit send. Turned my phone face down. Went to bed. Thursday came and I drove to Caldwell Street in the gray January cold and sat in Robert Crane's waiting room for 6 minutes looking at a framed watercolor of a lighthouse until Carol told me he was ready. His office smelled like printer paper and old coffee and something faintly cedarish, and Robert Crane himself was a compact man in his early 60s with reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead and the particular kind of stillness that people develop after spending decades listening to other people's worst problems. He gestured to the chair across from his desk and I sat down and he looked at me the way people look when they already know more than you do. Your grandmother called me, he said before I could speak. 3 weeks ago. He told me you might come in. I felt something shift in my chest. He sent me here. I know. He folded his hands on the desk. She's been my client for 19 years, Ms. Quillen. She drew up her original will with me a long time ago. But she called 3 weeks ago because something had changed. What changed? He opened a folder on his desk and turned it so I could read the first page. I leaned forward. It was a property document. Nana Ruth's house on Sycamore Drive, the one she had lived in for 44 years. The one where I had spent every school holiday until I was 15. The one with the yellow kitchen and the garden out back where she grew tomatoes every summer even though she said she didn't particularly like tomatoes. She just liked growing things. The document showed a lien. Placed on the property 8 months ago. I looked up at Robert Crane. What is this? He took a breath. Your father took out a private loan 14 months ago. $220,000. The lender is a holding company called Crestfield Capital Partners. He paused. That company is registered to your brother-in-law, Tanner Quillen. The room didn't spin the way it does in movies. It just went very quiet. I looked back down at the document. The interest rate printed in the middle of the page was 29%. The collateral listed on the line below that was Nana Ruth's property at 14 Sycamore Drive, Mill Haven. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the collateral agreement. It was shaky. Uneven in a way that Nana Ruth's handwriting had never been when I was growing up. The date next to it was from 9 months ago, the same week she had been in Mill Haven General with a respiratory infection, the same week my mother had called me to say she was fine. Don't worry, no need to visit. She didn't know what she was signing, I said. It wasn't a question. Robert Crane's expression confirmed it anyway. She told me she remembered signing something that week, he said carefully. She thought it was paperwork related to her hospital stay. She didn't have her glasses. She said your mother told her it was an insurance form. I felt something cold and very specific settle in my stomach. It wasn't anger yet. It was something more like clarity. The kind that arrives when a pattern you've been sensing for years finally reveals its shape all at once. This was why I was kept small. This was why every achievement of mine was minimized, every stumble amplified, every holiday a quiet exercise in reminding me of my place. It was never about love or favoritism or the complicated dynamics of family. It was about keeping me from asking questions. About keeping me from looking too closely at the edges of things. I was a risk. And a $2 scratch ticket was a very efficient way of telling a person that they don't matter enough to look twice at anything. There's more, Robert said. He slid a second page across the desk. I looked at it. It was a trust document. Your grandmother established this 11 years ago. He let me read the header. The Sycamore Trust. Beneficiary, Tessa Marie Quillen. I looked up. She set aside the property and a sum of money for you, he continued. At the time it was established, the property was valued at $340,000. She also contributed a savings amount over the years. The current total, excluding the property, is $480,000. I had to put the paper down. I had to press both palms flat on his desk for a moment just to have something solid under my hands. He never told me. She was afraid, he said simply. That if your mother found out, it would disappear. I thought about every Christmas, every birthday, every year of quiet invisibility. Nana Ruth had been protecting something for me the entire time. Not because she pitied me. Because she believed in me when no one else in that house was paying enough attention to bother. I drove home slowly, taking the long way back through the older part of Millhaven where the streets were lined with bare oak trees that looked like they were holding their arms out. I had two things now. A trust fund my grandmother had built in secret over 11 years. And a lottery win worth $75 million that my own mother had handed me as a joke. And I had a lien on my grandmother's house, placed there by a man who sat at our Christmas table and laughed first when the scratch ticket came out. I thought about Tanner Quillen. About the way he watched me across rooms. About the way he always seemed faintly amused by me specifically, not by Diane, not by my parents, but by me. Like I was a variable he had already accounted for and dismissed. He had made a mistake. They all had. But Tanner had made the specific mistake of underestimating the one person in that family who had nothing to lose and had just acquired every resource she could possibly need. I called Robert Crane from my car before I pulled out of his parking lot. He picked up on the second ring. I want to challenge the lien, I said. I want to know every legal option available to protect that property and I want to know them by Monday. He didn't sound surprised. I'll have a full briefing ready, he said. And Miss Quillen? Yes. Your grandmother asked me to tell you something if you ever came in. I waited. She said, and I'm quoting directly here, tell Tessa that I always knew she was the one paying attention. I sat in the parking lot on Caldwell Street for a few minutes after I hung up, watching the gray sky over Millhaven, thinking about a woman in her 80s who had spent 11 years quietly building a safety net for the granddaughter everyone else had written off. She had seen something in me that I had spent most of my life trying to convince myself wasn't really there. I was done convincing myself of that. That evening I did something I hadn't done since Christmas. I picked up the scratch ticket from the kitchen counter where it had been sitting under a coffee mug and I looked at it again. Red and gold, crumpled at one corner, $75 million printed in official black ink under the silver scratch coating. My mother had bought it at the Route 9 gas station as a punchline. What she had actually done was hand me the key to the lock on every door in this family. She just didn't know it yet. I put the ticket carefully in an envelope and filed it in the drawer where I kept important documents. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up a new browser tab and started researching how to claim a lottery prize anonymously in this state. Because when the moment came and it was coming, I needed every single advantage I could get. And I was just getting started. I spent the first weekend of January doing something I had never done before in my adult life. Nothing. I didn't check my emails. I didn't take on any new design work. I didn't return calls from clients or respond to the 3 increasingly cheerful messages my mother had sent since Christmas, each one progressively more casual in that specific way people get casual when they are actually extremely anxious. The first one said, "Hope you had a good drive home, sweetie." The second said, "Dad and I are thinking of doing a small New Year's dinner if you want to come." The third said, "Just checking in, haven't heard from you, let me know you're okay." I read all 3 in a row on Saturday morning and noticed something interesting. Not one of them mentioned the scratch ticket. Not one of them acknowledged Christmas. It was like the whole evening had been quietly edited out of the family record, the way uncomfortable things always were in the Quillen household. You just moved the furniture back and pretended the room had always looked like that. That evening I did something I hadn't done since Christmas. I picked up the scratch ticket from the kitchen counter where it had been sitting under a coffee mug and I looked at it again. Red and gold, crumpled at one corner, $75 million printed in official black ink under the silver scratch coating. My mother had bought it at the Route 9 gas station as a punchline. What she had actually done was hand me the key to the lock on every door in this family. She just didn't know it yet. I put the ticket carefully in an envelope and filed it in the drawer where I kept important documents. Then I opened my laptop, pulled up a new browser tab and started researching how to claim a lottery prize anonymously in this state. Because when the moment came and it was coming, I needed every single advantage I could get. And I was just getting started. I spent the first weekend of January doing something I had never done before in my adult life. Nothing. I didn't check my emails. I didn't take on any new design work. I didn't return calls from clients or respond to the 3 increasingly cheerful messages my mother had sent since Christmas, each one progressively more casual in that specific way people get casual when they are actually extremely anxious. The first one said, "Hope you had a good drive home, sweetie." The second said, "Dad and I are thinking of doing a small New Year's dinner if you want to come." The third said, "Just checking in, haven't heard from you, let me know you're okay." I read all 3 in a row on Saturday morning and noticed something interesting. Not one of them mentioned the scratch ticket. Not one of them acknowledged Christmas. It was like the whole evening had been quietly edited out of the family record, the way uncomfortable things always were in the Quillen household. You just moved the furniture back and pretended the room had always looked like that. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I spent Saturday morning at my kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down everything I knew in a straight column on the left side of the page and everything I still needed to find out in a column on the right. Left side. My father had borrowed $220,000 from a private lending company registered to Tanner. Nana Ruth's house had been used as collateral. Nana Ruth had signed documents while hospitalized and medicated, under the impression she was signing insurance paperwork. Robert Crane had the trust documents showing Nana Ruth had intended the property to come to me for 11 years. Right side. I needed to know whether Tanner's lending operation was legal. I needed to know the full extent of my father's debt. And I needed to know whether Diane had any idea what her husband had been doing. That last question was the one I kept coming back to, because the answer would determine everything about what came next. I called my cousin Petra on Sunday afternoon. Petra was my father's niece from his brother's side, which meant she was adjacent to our family without being inside it, close enough to know things but far enough to have some perspective. She was also the only person in the extended Quillen orbit who had ever treated me like a full human being at family gatherings rather than a supporting character. We weren't close in a daily sense, but we had the kind of relationship where you could call out of nowhere and pick up exactly where you left off. I told her I had some questions about Tanner and she went quiet in a way that told me she had been waiting for someone to ask. I knew it, she said finally. I always knew that man was into something. Tell me what you know, I said. She told me. According to Petra, who had heard most of this from her own father who had refused a loan from Tanner 2 years ago, Tanner Quillen's real estate consulting work was a front, or at least a partial front. The actual money came from private lending. He had been doing it for years, long before he married Diane, targeting people who couldn't access traditional bank loans, people with bad credit or complicated financial histories, or just people who were desperate enough to sign anything put in front of them. The interest rates were predatory by any reasonable standard, and the collateral terms were structured in a way that made default almost inevitable for borrowers who didn't have legal counsel reviewing the paperwork. He had done it to at least 4 families that Petra knew of personally in Millhaven and the surrounding area. He had done it to my father. And when my father couldn't cover the collateral on his own, Tanner had turned to the one asset in the family that wasn't in my father's name. Nana Ruth's house. Why didn't anyone say anything, I asked. Because your father was ashamed, Petra said. And because Tanner made sure everyone who borrowed from him understood that making noise would only make things worse. There was a particular phrase he apparently used. We can handle this quietly or we can handle it the hard way. Most people chose quietly. I thanked Petra and told her I might need to call her again in the coming weeks. She said, whatever you need, Tessa. Nail him. Monday morning I was back in Robert Crane's office. He had the full briefing he'd promised, 6 pages of legal analysis printed and paper-clipped in the top left corner. I read through it while he watched me from across the desk. The situation was serious but not hopeless. The lien was challengeable on 2 grounds. First, the coercion argument. If we could demonstrate that Nana Ruth had been medicated and mentally compromised at the time of signing, and if her medical records from that hospitalization showed the level of sedation she'd been under, we had a viable case that the signature was obtained under duress. Second, the conflict of interest argument. Tanner Quillen was a member of the immediate family. The loan had been made to his father-in-law, secured against property belonging to his wife's grandmother, with interest terms that no legitimate financial institution would have approved. Robert believed a judge would look at this arrangement with considerable suspicion. The challenge wouldn't be fast. It wouldn't be simple. But with the right resources behind it, it was winnable. I have the resources, I told him. He looked at me carefully over his reading glasses. How much do you need me to know about that? I thought about it. Enough to do the job properly. He nodded once and made a note. We'll file the challenge this week. In the meantime, I want to ask you something. What do you want the outcome to look like? Not legally. Personally. I had been thinking about that question since Christmas night. I didn't want to punish anyone for the sake of it. I didn't want to blow up my family's lives because I had the money to do it and the anger to justify it. What I wanted was for Nana Ruth to be safe. For the house on Sycamore Drive to be hers again, fully and legally and permanently. And I wanted the truth to be visible. Not performed or announced or weaponized. Just visible. I was tired of things being kept in the dark because the light was inconvenient for certain people. The second thing that happened that Monday was that I drove past Tanner's commercial real estate office on Brennan Avenue. I had passed it dozens of times without thinking about it. It had one of those clean modern signs with a logo that looked professionally designed, cream background, dark green lettering, Quillen Property Group. There was a silver car in the lot I didn't recognize and a woman standing outside the entrance talking on a phone. Not a client, the body language was too familiar and too guarded at the same time. I didn't slow down. I kept driving. But I filed it away. That was a skill I had developed over 34 years of being the one who watched while everyone else performed. I noticed things. I filed them. I waited. Tuesday evening Diane called me. I almost let it go to voicemail but something made me answer. Her voice was different from the Christmas version of Diane, less polished, a little unsteady at the edges. She said she was calling to check in and I said I was fine and there was a silence that stretched a few beats too long. Then she said, "Have you talked to Mom lately?" "Not really," I said. She was quiet again. "Tessa," she started then stopped. "What?" "Never mind. It's nothing." She didn't sound like it was nothing. She sounded like a person standing at a door trying to decide whether to open it. I didn't push her. I had learned a long time ago that Diane operated on her own timeline and pushing her only made her retreat. I said, "Okay, well let me know if you want to talk." She said, "Yeah." And then she said something that I turned over in my mind for the rest of the evening. She said, "Do you ever feel like you don't really know someone? Even when you've been living with them for years?" I said yes. Honestly and without hesitation. There was another silence and then she said good night and hung up. I sat with that conversation for a long time afterward. Diane was seeing something. Maybe not the whole picture, maybe not even close, but a corner of it was becoming visible to her. The question was what she would do with it. The question was whether she would choose to keep looking or look away the way she had always looked away. I didn't know the answer yet. But something had shifted in her voice and I was paying attention. By the end of that first week of January, the legal challenge had been filed, my LLC for the lottery claim was 48 hours from being finalized, and I had started building something I thought of privately as the full picture. Every piece of information I had gathered since Christmas, every document, every conversation, every small detail that seemed minor on its own but connected to something larger when you held it next to the others. I had spent my whole life being dismissed as someone who didn't matter, who wasn't worth including, who could be handed a gas station scratch ticket while everyone else got something real. They had been so confident in that dismissal that they had gotten careless. And careless people leave things behind. I was just the person who had finally started picking them up. I had a meeting with Robert Crane the following Monday to review the first response from Crestfield Capital Partners' legal team. I had a folder on my laptop with 47 screenshots, 3 scanned documents, and a notes file now 11 pages long. And I had something I hadn't expected to feel in the middle of all of this. I felt focused. Not angry, not afraid, not small. Just completely focused. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I was doing and exactly why. That feeling was worth more than anything printed on any scratch ticket. The lottery claim was finalized on a Thursday morning in the second week of January. I sat in a glass-walled office in the State Lottery Commission building 40 minutes outside Millhaven, signed 11 pages of documents, and walked out into a parking lot holding a folder that represented $47 million after taxes. I had claimed through the LLC, which Robert Crane had helped me establish under a name with no connection to the Quillen family. Tessa Marie Designs LLC. The same name I used for my freelance business. Hidden in plain sight. Nobody at the commission asked questions. The process was clinical and efficient and completely devoid of drama, which was exactly what I needed. I drove back to Millhaven listening to the radio and stopping for gas on Route 9, the same gas station where my mother had bought my Christmas gift, and I filled my tank and went inside and bought a coffee and stood at the counter for a moment looking at the display of scratch tickets near the register. Red and gold, same design as mine. $2 each. I bought my coffee and left. What I did not do was tell anyone. Not Petra, not Robert Crane beyond what was professionally necessary, not the one friend from my design school years I still talked to regularly, a woman named Suki who lived in Portland and who I had been vague with since Christmas about what was happening in my life. I had spent 34 years being underestimated and I had learned something important from that experience. The moment people know you have power, they start adjusting their behavior around it. I needed to see my family as they actually were, not as they would perform if they knew what I was holding. So I kept the folder in my desk drawer and went on looking like Tessa Quillen, freelance graphic designer, 1-bedroom apartment, east side of Millhaven, not worth a second glance. The call that cracked everything open came on a Saturday afternoon, 2.5 weeks after Christmas. It was not from anyone I expected. It was from a man named Derek Poulin, who introduced himself as a former client of Crestfield Capital Partners, Tanner's lending company. He had gotten my number from Petra, he said, and he was sorry to bother me, but he had heard through a mutual contact that someone was legally challenging the lien on a property connected to Tanner Quillen, and he wanted me to know that he was not alone in his situation. He had borrowed $60,000 from Crestfield 3 years ago to cover medical bills after his wife's surgery. He had defaulted after 14 months when the interest had compounded to the point where his monthly payments exceeded his income. Tanner had taken his car and a piece of land Derek's father had left him. Derek had tried to fight it and been told by 2 different lawyers that the contract, while predatory, had been signed voluntarily and was technically enforceable. He had given up. But he hadn't forgotten. He asked me if I was really doing what Petra had suggested I was doing. I told him yes. He said, then I'll give you everything I have. Signed copies, payment records, correspondence, all of it. There are at least 6 of us that I know of. I said, send it to Robert Crane's office. He said, it'll be there Monday. I called Robert immediately after hanging up. He was quiet for a moment when I told him, and then he said, this changes things considerably. 6 complainants with documentation describing a pattern of predatory lending across multiple counties meant we were no longer talking about a family dispute over a property lien. We were talking about something that had a word for it, and that word was fraud. Robert said he was going to make 2 calls on Monday morning. One to a colleague who specialized in financial crimes. One to the State Attorney General's Consumer Protection Division. I said, do it. He said, Tessa, I want you to understand that once I make those calls, this moves beyond what either of us can fully control. The legal system has its own momentum. Are you certain? I thought about Nana Ruth signing a document she thought was an insurance form while she was on a hospital bed in Millhaven General, barely able to hold a pen. Yes, I said. I'm certain. The second thing that happened that Saturday came in the form of a news item. Small, easy to miss. A brief article in the Millhaven Courier's online edition about a local lottery jackpot winner who had claimed their prize anonymously through an LLC. The article didn't name me. It named the gas station on Route 9 as the purchase location and noted that the winning ticket had been bought on December 23rd. 2 days before Christmas. 2 days before my mother went to that same gas station and came back with the gift she handed me between 2 fingers at the dinner table. The article noted the jackpot amount. $75 million. My phone started ringing at approximately 4:30 that afternoon. My mother first. Then my father. Then Diane. Then a number I didn't recognize that turned out when I let it go to voicemail to be Tanner, his voice smooth and unhurried and so precisely calibrated to sound casual that it was almost impressive. Hey Tess, it's Tanner. Just saw something interesting in the news. Give me a call when you get a chance, would love to catch up. I played the voicemail 3 times. That phrase, would love to catch up, from a man who had spoken fewer than 40 words to me across 6 years of family gatherings. I set my phone on the kitchen counter and made dinner and let the calls pile up. By 9 that evening I had 22 missed calls. My mother had sent 4 text messages. The first said, Tessa honey, call me when you can. The second said, it's important sweetheart, please call. The third said, I'm worried about you, we all are. The fourth said, that lottery ticket I gave you at Christmas. Do you still have it? I'm just curious. That last one I read several times. Just curious. I had been sitting at that Christmas table being laughed at 3 weeks ago, and now my mother was just curious. I put my phone in a kitchen drawer, closed it, and went to read a book. I slept better than I had in weeks. Sunday morning brought a different kind of message. It came from Diane, and it was not like the others. No casual warmth, no performance. Just 9 words in a text message sent at 7:14 in the morning. I need to talk to you. Not on the phone. I stared at those 9 words for a long time. Diane had never in her adult life initiated a serious private conversation with me. She was the sister who kept things bright and surface level, who deflected with humor when things got uncomfortable, who had a talent for being in a room where something real was happening and managing not to engage with it directly. 9 words at 7 in the morning on a Sunday meant something had shifted for her. Something had happened. I texted back. Monday. Coffee place on Garfield Street. 10 o'clock. She replied within 30 seconds. I'll be there. I spent Sunday quietly. I went for a long walk through the older residential streets near my apartment, the ones with the big oak trees that were bare and gray in January but still had a kind of dignity about them. I thought about what Nana Ruth had said when she had squeezed my hand at the Christmas table before my mother led her away. The memory was clear. Her expression when she looked at me was not pity. It was not sorrow. It was something firmer than that. It was a woman in her 80s who had seen enough of life to know which people in a room were actually paying attention, and she was looking directly at the one she had chosen. I thought about the trust document. 11 years she had been building that. Through holidays and family dinners and every Christmas where I had folded napkins and carried dishes and been introduced as the other one. She had been watching me the entire time. I got home from my walk and opened my laptop and drafted a message to Robert Crane. I kept it brief. I want to be present when the legal challenge response comes in from Crestfield's lawyers. Whatever date that is, I want to be in the room. I also want to discuss timing. Specifically, I want to understand when and how the people involved will become aware of the full scope of what we are doing. He replied within the hour even though it was Sunday, which told me he understood the momentum we were building. He said, I'll confirm the date Monday and we should talk about the second point in person. Can you come in Tuesday morning? I replied yes and closed my laptop. That night I took the scratch ticket out of the envelope in my desk drawer one more time. I had developed a habit of doing this, not to look at the number which I had long since memorized but just to hold it. It was crumpled at one corner and the silver coating was scratched away in uneven strokes from where I had used the penny on the morning after Christmas. It was the most valuable thing I had ever owned and it looked like something you'd find in the bottom of a coat pocket after a long winter. My mother had pressed it into my hands between two fingers like she was handing me something vaguely distasteful. A consolation prize for a person she had already written off. I put it back in the envelope and filed it in the drawer and went to bed. Tomorrow I was going to meet my sister for coffee and whatever she had to tell me was going to be the thing that decided the final shape of all of this. I could feel it the way you feel a change in the weather before it arrives, something moving in the atmosphere, pressure shifting, the air holding its breath. It was almost time. Diane was already at the coffee place on Garfield Street when I arrived Monday morning. She was sitting at the table furthest from the window, which was not like her. Diane liked to be seen. She liked good lighting and visible locations, the kind of seat where people might notice you looking put together. The table she had chosen was in the back corner near the service hallway, half hidden behind a tall wooden divider with a trailing plant on top of it. She had both hands wrapped around a mug and she was staring into it when I walked in. She looked up when I sat down and I saw immediately that she had not been sleeping. The careful presentation she usually maintained, the highlighted hair, the precise makeup was still technically there, but it had been assembled in a hurry and she hadn't quite pulled it off. There were shadows under her eyes that concealer hadn't fully covered. She looked like a woman who had been awake for 3 days deciding something. I didn't say anything at first. I ordered a coffee from the server who came over and then I sat across from my sister and waited. Diane had asked for this meeting. Whatever was coming needed to come from her at her own pace, and I was not going to make it easier or harder by filling the silence prematurely. She stared at her mug for another moment and then she looked up at me directly. He's been lying to me, she said. Not recently. The whole time. Kept my face still. What do you know, I asked. She pulled her phone from her bag and slid it across the table. On the screen was a photograph of a document. I recognized the format immediately because I had seen something similar in Robert Crane's office. It was a lending agreement from Crestfield Capital Partners. Dated 4 years ago before she and Tanner had even been married. Signed by Tanner as the sole director of the company. She had found it in his home office 2 nights ago. She hadn't been looking for it specifically, she'd been searching for a folder of their shared tax documents because she had decided, quietly and alone, to consult her own lawyer about something. She wouldn't say what yet, but the way she said it told me she had been moving toward a decision for longer than the past few days. The Crestfield document had been in a filing box at the back of his office closet, and once she had found that one she had kept looking. There were others. 7 separate lending agreements in that box, all structured the same way. All with interest rates that made her physically uncomfortable to read. She had photographed every page. I asked her if Tanner knew she had seen them. She shook her head. He's been in Chicago since Friday for a work trip. He gets back tonight. I asked her what she wanted to do. She was quiet for a long moment. Her hands tightened around the mug. I want to know everything you know, she said finally. I've been pretending not to notice things for a long time, Tessa. I'm done pretending. So I told her. Not everything at once and not carelessly, but I told her the shape of it. The loan to our father. The lien on Nana Ruth's house. The document signed in the hospital. The 6 other borrowers Derek Poulin had connected us with, the ones whose cases were now sitting in a file at the State Attorney General's office. I told her about Robert Crane and the legal challenge and the financial crimes specialist Robert had brought in the previous week. I told her that what Tanner had been running was not a legitimate business operating in a gray area. It was a structured predatory lending operation that had caused real harm to real families across multiple counties, and our father had not been his only family connection. He had used our family's proximity to him to access targets he might not otherwise have reached. Diane listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment and then she said, "The Italy trip. My parents paid for part of it using money Dad borrowed from Tanner." I hadn't known that specific detail. The circle closed completely in that moment. The Italy trip my family had celebrated at the Christmas table while handing me a $2 scratch ticket had been partially funded by a predatory loan that was secured against Nana Ruth's house. The whole performance of that evening, the applause, the happy tears, the look on my mother's face when she pressed that ticket into my hand, it had been built on a foundation of something rotten. And every person at that table except Nana Ruth and me had either known it or chosen not to look. Diane filed for a legal separation the following Wednesday. She did it with her own lawyer, a woman she had found independently, and she did it without telling Tanner in advance. He found out when the papers were served to his office on Brennan Avenue on a Thursday morning. I know this because Petra called that afternoon, having heard from someone in the building next door about considerable noise from the Quillen Property Group suite around 11. I did not feel satisfaction hearing it. What I felt was the particular stillness that comes when something that has been structurally unsound for a long time finally gives way. Not a surprise. Just an inevitability that had finally arrived. Robert Crane called me the same Thursday afternoon. The Attorney General's office had formally opened an investigation into Crestfield Capital Partners. They had reviewed the 6 borrower cases and had identified what a senior investigator described as a clear pattern of intent. They were also looking at 2 additional cases that had come forward after word of the investigation had circulated through certain legal circles in Millhaven. Robert said the investigation could take months and that outcomes were never guaranteed, but that the documentation was extensive and the pattern was unambiguous. He also told me that the lien challenge on Nana Ruth's property had been accepted for expedited review given the medical evidence regarding the circumstances of her signature. He expected a ruling within 3 weeks. I asked him what the most likely outcome was. He said in cases with this level of documented coercion, judges tend to take a dim view. I'll leave it at that. I said that was enough. I visited Nana Ruth that Saturday. She was at her sister's house across town, where she had been staying since I had quietly arranged for her to move out of the situation she was in, with full-time support and people around her who actually wanted her there. Her sister, my great-aunt Bev, was 83 and sharp as a tack and had opinions about everything and expressed them freely, which meant the house was never quiet and Nana Ruth seemed more alert and more herself than she had in months. I sat with them both at Bev's kitchen table and ate soup and listened to them argue cheerfully about something that had apparently happened in 1987. At one point Nana Ruth looked at me across the table and said, "You look different." I asked her how. "Settled," she said. "Like you've put your feet down somewhere and decided to stay." I thought about that word. Settled. It was not a word I had associated with myself before. I had spent so many years feeling like a temporary arrangement in my own life, like I was always one difficult conversation away from being moved to a different room or asked to set the table instead. I said, "I think I have." She nodded like that was exactly what she had expected to hear. My parents called twice that week. My father on Tuesday, my mother on Thursday. I answered both calls and kept them brief. My father sounded diminished in a way I hadn't heard before. Quieter than his usual register, like something had gone out of him. He didn't mention Tanner or the loan or Nana Ruth's house. He asked how my work was going. I said fine. Then after a long silence he said, "I'm sorry, Tessa." No specifics, no framing, nothing attached to it. Just those 2 words. I said okay, Dad, and we hung up. I didn't know what to do with that apology yet. I filed it away. Not discarded, not resolved. Just set aside until I had enough distance to understand what it was worth. My mother's call was different. She wanted to talk about the future. About how families went through difficult periods and came out stronger on the other side. About how she had always loved both her daughters equally even if she hadn't always shown it the right way. She used the phrase the right way twice and I noticed that she never actually named a specific thing she had done wrong, just gestured in the direction of wrongness in general. I listened until she finished and then I said, "Mom, when you're ready to have a conversation about what actually happened, I'll be here for it." She went quiet. Then she said, "You've become very hard, Tessa." I said, "No. I've become very clear. There's a difference." She didn't have an answer for that and we said goodbye and hung up. 3 weeks after that phone call, the ruling on Nana Ruth's property came through. The lien was voided. The judge's written decision cited the medical records, the conflict of interest, and the pattern of conduct documented across the broader investigation. The house on Sycamore Drive was Nana Ruth's again, fully and cleanly and permanently, with a legal protection clause that Robert had drafted ensuring it would remain so. I drove to Bev's house to tell her in person. She was in the kitchen when I arrived and I sat down across from her at the table and told her it was done. She didn't cry. She just reached across and put her hand over mine and said, "I knew you were the one." I said, "You always said that." She said, "Because it was always true." We sat there for a while without saying anything else. Outside the window Bev's bird feeder was moving slightly in the January wind, and a single cardinal was perched on the edge of it, red and startling against the gray sky, not going anywhere. Some things I thought just hold their ground. And that is more than enough. 14 months ago I was sitting at a Christmas table in my parents' house on Birchwood Lane, holding a $2 scratch ticket between my fingers while the room laughed. I have thought about that moment more times than I can count, not with bitterness, not anymore, but with something closer to amazement. Not at the money. At the distance. At how far a person can travel in 14 months when they finally stop waiting for permission to move. Let me tell you where everyone landed. Not because they deserve the attention but because the truth of a story lives in its endings, and I promised myself when I started telling this that I would tell all of it. Tanner Quillen was formally charged by the State Attorney General's office 11 months ago. The charges included predatory lending, fraudulent misrepresentation, and financial elder abuse in connection with the circumstances surrounding Nana Ruth's signature. Derek Poulin and 4 of the other borrowers testified. The case took 7 months to build and 2 weeks to try. Tanner hired an expensive lawyer and sat in the courtroom looking exactly the way he always looked at family dinners, contained, calculating, faintly amused. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. He was convicted on 6 of 8 counts. Sentencing was 3 months ago. I did not attend. I didn't need to be in that room. I already knew what I knew, and a verdict, however satisfying in the abstract, was not the thing that had actually set me free. The truth had done that long before any jury got involved. The Quillen Property Group office on Brennan Avenue is a yoga studio now. I drove past it in November and noticed the new sign in the window, pale blue lettering, a lotus flower in the corner. I sat at the traffic light looking at it for a moment and then the light changed and I drove on. Diane is living in a rental apartment on the north side of Mill Haven, 3 blocks from a park she walks through every morning. She and I have coffee together most Sundays now, which is something neither of us would have predicted 14 months ago and which still occasionally feels slightly strange in the way that new things do when you're not yet used to them being normal. She is in therapy, which she mentions without embarrassment, and she has started taking a pottery class on Wednesday evenings, which she mentions with the particular enthusiasm of someone who has recently discovered that they are allowed to have hobbies that serve no practical purpose. She is not the Diane I grew up with. She is someone quieter and more considered. Someone who pauses before she speaks and means what she says when she does. I don't know yet whether we will ever be close in the way sisters on television are close. But we are honest with each other now, and that is something I never had before, and I find that I value it more than I would have expected. My parents sold the house on Birchwood Lane 8 months ago to cover debts that had accumulated faster than they could manage once Tanner's operation collapsed and the financial arrangements that had been holding certain things together unraveled. They are renting a 2-bedroom place on the other side of town. My mother has a part-time job at an interior design showroom, which suits her in ways she probably hasn't fully acknowledged yet, and my father does bookkeeping for 3 small businesses in Mill Haven, which is quiet work that he appears to do carefully and without complaint. We speak occasionally. My father texts on my birthday and sometimes on random Tuesdays for no apparent reason, just a sentence or two: saw a cardinal in the yard today, or made that soup you used to like, which I find I don't mind. My mother calls every few weeks. The conversations are still careful, still circling around the edges of what actually happened rather than moving through the middle of it. But they are shorter than they used to be and less performed, and once about 4 months ago she said something that surprised me. She said, "I think I was afraid of you, Tessa." I didn't understand it back then. I asked her what she meant. She said, "You always saw things clearly." It made me uncomfortable. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "I know, Mom." And I think we both understood that was as close as we were going to get that day, and we let it be enough. I do not know if I will ever fully forgive my parents. I have stopped treating that question as urgent. Forgiveness is not a destination you schedule. It arrives when it arrives, and sometimes it arrives in pieces, and sometimes certain pieces never come, and you build your life around the shape of what's actually there rather than what you wish were there. I'm working on that. I think I will be working on it for a long time. That seems honest. Now let me tell you about Nana Ruth, because she is the part of this story that matters most, and I have been saving her for last on purpose. The house on Sycamore Drive has a new front door. Deep green, with a brass knocker that Nana Ruth picked out herself from a catalog she studied for 2 weeks before deciding. The garden out back has been completely replanted. I spent 4 weekends out there in the spring, turning the soil and putting in what she wanted. Tomatoes along the south-facing fence because she still insists she doesn't particularly like tomatoes, but she likes growing them. Lavender along the path to the back gate. A rose bush near the kitchen window that she can see from her chair at the table. The full-time care I arranged is still in place. A woman named Gloria who arrives at 8 every morning and stays until 6, and who Nana Ruth has decided is the most sensible person she has met in 20 years. Which is the highest compliment Nana Ruth gives to anyone. I visit 3 times a week. Sometimes we talk for hours about everything and nothing: her childhood in a town 2 states away, the 44 years she spent in that house, the things she noticed about people that she never said out loud until now. Sometimes I bring work and sit at her kitchen table while she reads or watches the birds at the feeder I installed along the window ledge. Sometimes we just sit in the garden in the late afternoon and watch the light change. She is friendlier than she was. She tires more easily. There are days when the sharpness in her eyes is there and days when it is further away. I do not think about those days more than I have to. What I think about instead is the fact that she is in her own home in her yellow kitchen, with her tomatoes coming up along the south fence, and that nobody in the world has any claim on any of it except her. As for me, I still design. The freelance practice I built in my 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Millhaven has become something larger and more deliberate now. I took on 2 partners last spring, both women I had admired from a distance for years and finally had the confidence to approach. We have a small studio space on the 3rd floor of a building on Caldwell Street, 4 blocks from Robert Crane's office, which I find quietly amusing. The work is the same work it always was: thoughtful, careful, built to last. But I do it now without the low constant anxiety of someone who is always 1 month away from the edge. That anxiety was so familiar for so long that I didn't notice how much of my energy it consumed until it was gone. The money sits mostly in a trust managed by a financial advisor Robert recommended, diversified and carefully structured, and not something I think about every day. I have used portions of it deliberately and without apology. Nana Ruth's Care. The House. A scholarship fund I established quietly through a local arts organization, supporting young women from Millhaven and the surrounding counties who are pursuing creative careers and who come from families that don't understand what that means or don't believe it's worth supporting. I named it the Sycamore Fund. I did not put my name on it. The work is the point, not the credit. People ask me sometimes whether winning changed me. I tell them the truth, which is that the winning was never really the event. The event was Christmas night 14 months ago, when I sat at a table and felt the full weight of being dismissed by the people who were supposed to know me best, and instead of shrinking from it the way I always had before, something in me went absolutely still and clear and decided that it was finished. The scratch ticket was just the mechanism. The decision had already been made before I scratched a single panel. I was done being small. I just needed one more reminder of what small felt like before I could walk away from it permanently. I drove past the gas station on Route 9 last week. I don't know why I took that route specifically, I don't usually, but I did, and I slowed down a little as I passed it. The same display of scratch tickets in the window, red and gold for the holiday season, $2 each. A woman was coming out of the door with a coffee and a paper bag, and she didn't look up as I passed. Just a regular Tuesday morning on Route 9 in Millhaven. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that looked from the outside like the place where one particular unremarkable Tuesday morning 14 months ago, my mother had stopped on her way to a Christmas dinner and bought the thing she thought was a joke at my expense. I kept driving. The road was clear and the sky was pale winter blue and I had somewhere to be. Nana Ruth was expecting me for lunch. The tomatoes she had texted that morning are doing something interesting. Come and look. I was already looking forward to it. If this story made you feel something, don't just scroll away. There are so many stories out there that never get told, and here on Confire Stories we bring them to life. So if you enjoy emotional real-life drama like this, take a second to subscribe and be part of the journey. And if you've ever been in a situation like this, or have a story of your own, share it in the comments. I read them. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.